Good morning, everyone, panelists, audience. Thank you for joining What We Learned, Developing National Roadmaps and City Action Plans for Zero Carbon Buildings. My name is Natalie Tamir. I'm an analyst on the WRI Buildings team and will be emceeing this closing event. We've turned off the comment section, but I do encourage you to share any questions that may arise. We encourage all questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your webinar screen. We will address them during the Q&A section at the end. I now present Michael Doust, the Director of Urban Efficiency and Climate for WRI, to introduce our webinar.
Great, thank you very much, Natalie, and welcome everyone to this webinar, and thank you for joining. As the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator project comes to a close, we're very excited to share the major accomplishments of the project with you, as well as what we've learned along the way. The ZCBA, or CCBA, is a project funded by the GEF, implemented by UNEP and WRI, and led locally by 5 different partners: WRI Türkiye, the Colombia Green Building Council, the Green Building Council of Costa Rica, ICLEI South Asia, and the Kenya Green Building Society. Local leads worked closely with leaders in the public and private sectors to develop locally relevant roadmaps, action plans, approaches to tracking progress, and business models for investing in zero carbon buildings. In this event, local leaders will share the lessons they've learned in developing these tools for building decarbonization. Cross-cutting themes will touch on key challenges and opportunities for including the informal housing sector, incorporating considerations for disasters, working with the financial sector, and integrating gender and equity into roadmaps and action plans. We've got a really great agenda and a set of speakers lined up for you today. We'll tell you all about the ZCBA, host a panel and Q&A session, and you'll hear from city leaders from Colombia, Costa Rica, India, Kenya, and Turkey on what they need from international organizations to further accelerate the implementation of their ZCB plans. With that, again, welcome to this webinar, and I'll hand back to Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I now turn it over to my colleagues, Samira Malavia and Fairoz Lutfi, to share our achievements throughout the ZCBA project.
Thanks, Natalie, and I welcome everyone again to this webinar. Just so I think we have a couple of new folks definitely joining us in the webinar. So just a refresher first on what the ZCBA project is about. Next slide, please. And so for those of us, in this, and when it comes to just looking at the 3 components of the ZCBA, we are talking about the national commitments and roadmaps as component number 1, in which our objective was to develop these national roadmaps for 2 countries, Colombia and Turkey. A related component, development of subnational strategies and action plans, wherein given the focus of the national government and the commitment to implement these roadmaps locally, we also were working with 2 other cities, 2 cities in each country, to develop these aligned policies and projects for the implementation of the national commitments and roadmaps. And finally, city pipelines for future scaling, in which we worked with 3 additional cities to co-create zero carbon building action plans. Next slide. And this slide here summarizes the timeline and the project milestones in general. Just to go over some of them very quickly, we have our partners, CCCS, who are going to be talking more about the lessons they have learned. But in collaboration with the national ministry there, the national roadmap for Colombia was launched in June of last year, whereafter CCCS embarked on a series of workshops and webinars to socialize the roadmap findings and build capacity for implementation. In Colombia, again, city action plans were also drafted and launched in Cali and Bogota. In Cali, incidentally, the policy process is underway for the development of a sustainable construction manual. We also added a list of new cities, as I mentioned in the 3rd component, the Costa Rica city cluster, 1 city in India, Nagpur, and the Laikipia County in Kenya, to expand the reach of the ZCBA beyond just the Turkey and Colombia focus way back in May of last year. And finally, we have a lot going on right now as we wrap up the project. The city action plans for Konya and Gaziantep, the two other cities in Turkey, are being currently drafted. And in Türkiye, the policy focus will be on the local implementation of the nearly zero energy building and yes, PR certification. Next slide, please. And if you want to get a glimpse of what Colombia's roadmap looks like, we do have a detailed project update, the link for which we're happy to share in the chat box. But this is what the Colombia National Roadmap targets look like. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but this is just to give you a glimpse of the pathway that Colombia has prepared for arriving at a global goal of 100% of new buildings and major renovations being net zero carbon, both operational and embodied carbon by 2050. Next slide. And as I explained in the third component, we had expanded the ZCBA to capture the global, to capture global aspects. So we have a bunch of ZCBA global partners. We have the World GBC in Latin America as the regional lead. We have ICLEI South Asia, later going to be speaking on the panel as a Southeast Asia, as a South Asia regional lead, as well as a Southeast Asia regional lead. We also have the Colombia GBC, which developed the National Roadmaps and City Action Plans, WRI Türkiye, developing the National Roadmaps and City Action Plan for Turkey, the Costa Rica GBC, developing the cohort of the City Action Plans in Costa Rica, and the Kenya GBS working on not just the Laikipia County City Action Plan, but also the regional lead for Africa. Next slide. In terms of the tools and approaches we have used, we did refer to a couple of materials. We did not want to reinvent the wheel here. So we have been heavily guided by the work that Global ABC had done on the regional roadmaps of building and decarbonization. We also referred to the Bringing Embodied Carbon Upfront report, which had been released by WGBC. And in the process, we developed our own templates for national roadmaps and city action plans. And these templates are available for our partner organizations to use. We also paid a lot of attention and focus to integrating gender and equity considerations in the ZCB action planning and have developed toolkits and guidance documents for the same. Next slide. And finally, in terms of the 5-step process that we have followed, the dialogue, assess, act, monitor, and invest. This is just to show you the level of rigor that has gone into the roadmaps and national plan development process. And my colleague Fairuz will be going deeper into each of these 5 aspects, as well as eliciting responses from our panelists on their learnings across these 5 major key steps in the action plan development. And with that, I will quickly hand it over back to Natalie, who will take us to the next segment.
Thank you, Sumeda. It's really fantastic to be able to take a moment and appreciate all of the work that's been done around the world on this topic and this project of the past 2.5 years. Thank you for giving us that overview. We're also excited to present interventions from city leadership on who will discuss their plans for implementing zero carbon buildings. We will start with a video from Mauricio Galvan from the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Colombia.
El proyecto acelerador de edificaciones neto cero carbono, el cual fue apoyado a nivel internacional por el Fondo para el Medio Ambiente Mundial, el Programa de las Naciones Unidas para el Medio Ambiente y el Instituto de Recursos Mundiales, WRI, así como la implementación a nivel local por parte del Consejo Colombiano de Construcción Sostenible, generó un impacto positivo en el sector de las edificaciones nuevas y existentes en el país, como trazando el camino hacia la sostenibilidad de la construcción en Colombia. Es por esto que se generó la hoja de ruta de edificaciones neto cero carbono y otros proyectos como los planes de acción a nivel local para las ciudades de Bogotá y Cali. Estos instrumentos se convierten en medios de implementación para lograr la meta de reducción del 51% para 2030 con respecto al escenario de referencia comprometido del país en la NDC y que está alineado con la estrategia climática de largo plazo de Colombia, la E2050, a través de la cual vamos a lograr ser carbono neutrales en este año. Entonces, desde la institucionalidad, ¿cuáles son los pasos a seguir? No pueden ser otros que generar todas las condiciones habilitantes para lograr de aquí al 2030 implementar todas las sanciones transformadoras que se generaron y que se generaron como producto del proyecto, así como los demás arreglos institucionales con miras a la carbono neutralidad y el cumplimiento de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible por parte de Colombia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mauricio. We'll hear more from the Colombia team later about how the national roadmap and city action plans, as well as the national goals and targets and national tracking progresses all integrate to lead to even speeding the transition to building decarbonization in Colombia. Next, we'll hear from Jean-Paul Archer, Deputy Director of Land Planning in the city of Cali.
Hola, mi nombre es Jean-Paul Archer, soy arquitecto urbanista, subdirector de planificación del Departamento Administrativo de Planeación en la ciudad de Cali. Nos encontramos actualmente en el Consejo Distrital haciendo el trámite para la adopción del Manual de Construcción Sostenible. Es un documento que queda estipulado en nuestro documento maestro de ordenamiento territorial, que es el Plan de Ordenamiento Territorial, que se adoptó en el año 2014, y que nosotros hoy estamos como herramienta señalada en ese instrumento, estamos desarrollándolo como instrumento para incentivar al sector de la construcción con beneficios tributarios y beneficios urbanísticos para que adopten medidas para la mitigación del cambio climático, para que adopten medidas limpias en su proceso de construcción. Entonces, por eso hemos creado el sello Cali Construye Sostenible. Este sello, digamos, es el que contiene todos los criterios mediante los cuales podría el sector constructor acceder a esos beneficios. Además, son beneficios para construcciones nuevas y para construcciones existentes. Entonces, nuestro sello Cali Construye Sostenible validará que puedan entrar a ser parte de esos beneficios. Lo otro es que para poder implementar y para poder evaluar la adopción de esos criterios, pues tenemos el acompañamiento del proyecto CELA de la cooperación suiza, con el cual estamos desarrollando la herramienta tecnológica para poder realmente medir el impacto de la implementación de estos criterios y así otorgar los sellos, digamos que serían los derechos para poder acceder a los beneficios tributarios o a los urbanísticos. También queremos que estos beneficios y digamos el desarrollo de estos incentivos se pueda extender a la región, se pueda extender al área metropolitana funcional que tenemos en Cali como ciudad núcleo y los municipios satélites importantes que tenemos en nuestra estructura territorial. Entonces quisiéramos que eso llegara allá. Igualmente aprovechar el ambiente y el paisaje de nuestra región, que es nuestro mayor potencial, y poder convertir eso en esquemas de carbono positivo por nuestra estructura ecológica principal adaptada a la estructura urbana que usamos en la actualidad.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. The Cali Sustainable Construction Manual is published. If you are interested in learning more, please do reach out to us about that. I now turn it to Berna Mavigok of the Department of Environmental Protection, Zero Waste and Climate Change for the Gaziantep Metropolitan Municipality.
Herkese merhaba. Ben Berna Mavgök. Gaziantep Büyükşehir Belediyesi Çevre Koruma, Sıfır Atık ve İklim Değişikliği Daire Başkanlığı, Enerji Yönetimi ve İklim Değişikliği Şube Müdürlüğü'nde görev almaktayım. Küresel Çevre Fonu tarafından desteklenen Sıfır Karbon Binalar Projesi'nde Türkiye'de seçilen 2 şehirden biri Gaziantep olmuştur. Gaziantep Büyükşehir Belediyesi 10 yılı aşkın süredir iklim değişikliği ve enerji verimliliği çalışmalarına öncelik vermektedir ve çalışmaları ile diğer belediyelere örnek olmaktadır. 2014 yılında kurulan Enerji Yönetimi ve İklim Değişikliği Şube Müdürlüğü, kamuda enerji verimliliği, yenilenebilir enerji ve enerji yönetimi alanlarında ulusal ve uluslararası bazda projeler yürüten Türkiye'deki ilk müdürlüklerden olmuştur. Enerji verimliliğine öncelikle kendi binalarımızdan başlayarak Büyükşehir Belediyesi hizmet binamızda ve Engelsiz Yaşam Merkezi'nde yapmış olduğumuz verimlilik arttırıcı çalışmalar sonrasında BRI Minimum sertifikasını mükemmel seviyede almaya hak kazandık. Belediyemiz 2011 yılında iklim değişikliği eylem planını hazırlayan Türkiye'deki ilk belediye olmuştur. İklim değişikliğine uyum eylem planını ise Mayıs ayında tamamlayarak eylemleri hayata geçirmeye başlayacağız. Başkanlar Akdi'ne üye olan belediyemiz 2050 yılına kadar karbon emisyonlarında %80 oranında azaltım taahhütü vermiştir. Tam da bu noktada Sıfır Karbon Binalar projesiyle Gaziantep'teki yapı sektörünün karbonsuzlaşması için çalışmalara başlamak, iklim değişikliği hedeflerimiz doğrultusunda yapı sektöründe yapılabilecekleri hayata geçirmemiz için hızlandırıcı olmuştur. Gaziantep yapı sektörü için karbonsuzlaşma eylem planında eylemlerimizi belirlerken WRI Türkiye ile anket çalışmaları, odak grup toplantıları, yerel paydaş çalışmaları düzenleyerek katılımcılığın olmasına özen gösterdik. Yapı malzemeleri, inşaat yapımı, yıkım ve bertaraf, yeni binalar ve mevcut binaların kapsamlı tadilatları konusunda çalışmalar yürüttük. Çözüm önerileri geliştirdik. Binaların tüm yaşam döngüsü boyunca sebep oldukları emisyonları azaltmaya hedefledik. Gaziantep yapı sektörü için karbonsuzlaşma eylem planını hazırlarken en önemli çıktılar. Eylemlerin hayata geçmesi için sektörün tüm paydaşlarının görev almasının ve finans mekanizmalarının geliştirilmesinin önemi olmuştur. Rapor ile ortaya koyulan eylemleri hayata geçirmek için çalışmalarımızı var gücümüzle devam ettireceğiz.
Thank you, Berna. I turn it to Carlos Cordero Vega, the Director of Planning in the Ministry of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica.
Good morning. My name is Carlos Cordero, and I am the Director of the Secretariat of Planning in the Ministry of Environment and Energy in Costa Rica. The decarbonization of the economy by the year 2050 is a clear goal that Costa Rica has to achieve through the National Decarbonization Plan, which this administration has ratified. But at the same time, we want to have much more technical and financial support to make it a reality. We need an economy based on the use of renewable energy, zero emissions, and climate-smart technology. But also, decarbonization is a route that we could say is mandatory. The world must to go in that direction. We have no choice if we want to keep economy balance and the ecosystem and nature balance. It is for this reason that the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator is so important. It represents an ally in the national and global objectives. As a background, I can tell you that during 2020, the Ministry of Environment and Energy, together with the Ministry of Housing and Human Settlements, agreed for the first time that the urban environment agenda and the axis called sustainable construction have the least progress of all this agenda. This gives us scientific evidence of the importance of the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator. As a country, we need to move faster in adaptation and resilience to climate change and identify transformative action to build systemic change toward the decarbonization of the construction sector. It is important to find a way to scale the project and expand it to more local governments to increase the positive impact. It is impossible to achieve decarbonization only with central government initiative. It is necessary to replicate this type of project in all sectors. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. I now turn it over to Fairuz Lutfi, our moderator of the panel upcoming, and will show a slide with all our panelists. One moment, Fairuz.
Thank you, Natalie. So I'll be the moderator for this panel discussion, and I would like to introduce you to our panelists today. So we'll hear from Lorena Pup of the Colombia Green Building Council, Nicolas of Green Building Council of Costa Rica, Meltem Bayraktar Antukse Usumoglu of WRI Türkiye, Louis Kariuki of the Kenya Green Building Society, and Nikhil Kolspati of ICLEI South Asia. Welcome everyone to this panel. You can turn on your videos, please. And as part of the ZCBA, all partners follow this process to develop roadmaps. If we can show the slide that my colleague Sumida just mentioned. So we have a number of steps that have been followed, and all the different partners in each region have been working on each of these stages, in all of these stages. Thank you for presenting that, Nata. So we have dialogue, assess, act, monitor, invest. So this is part of the process and the steps that have been followed for the preparation of the roadmaps and city action plans. So we understand that all the partners have focused on every stage, but for this discussion, we will be focusing on the main lessons learned for each stage. And I will be asking each of you, and so we can hear some insights from each partner for certain aspects of the project. And now for the first step, dialogue, in which public and private sector stakeholders explore the options to advance local action on zero carbon buildings. And I would like to start with Lorena from Colombia to share with us, how did you maintain stakeholder engagement throughout the entire road mapping process? And over to you.
Hi, Farouz, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here to share the experience that we had in Colombia. So related to the stakeholders engagement, the first of all, what we did was to set the advisory committee. That was key because at the beginning, the Ministry of Environment was the leader of the project from the government level, and we set this advisory committee. There we have the Ministry of Environment, we have the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Housing, the National Planning Department, and from the association, we have this association which is called CAMACOL in Colombia, and is the Construction Trade Association. We also, with this group, selected the two cities that were going to be involved in the project. Those were Cali and Bogota, and we invited the planning department of these two cities to join the advisory committee. So from this committee, it was very important that it meets every month and has among these objectives the project governance review, the project scope review, and the alignment with the country's climate change commitments, and very important, the review of the key actors, the stakeholders, and their roles in the project. So with this committee, we formed the group of experts. It was based on the key topics of the project. There we had in total 9 groups of stakeholders, and these were aligned also with the life cycle of the buildings. So there we had material provision and circularity, planning and design, construction, we had operation, and for specific topics, we had clean energy and compensation, building systems, and finance. And the last two, we had specific topics for the cities of Bogota and Cali. We had in total 384 experts, and we had around 150 organizations that joined this conversation. It was absolutely key to engage the association of the industries such as wood, steel, concrete, glass, and the banking sector, among others. It was key for this conversation, and also in this engagement of the stakeholder was key to have the information prepared for every session and how to have constant feedback from the advisory committee and the association and the working groups to make them validate all the information that they give us and to keep them involved in all the process through these 2 years of work.
Thank you so much, Lorena, for sharing these insights. And now we understand that one of the biggest challenges to making progress in building decarbonization is shifting priorities between elections and political priorities. So this next question is to Louis from Laikipia County. Louis, how did you reconnect with key stakeholders amidst political change?
Thank you, Fairuz, for the question. So yes, we did, even prior to the elections themselves, did know and note that the general elections would be a potential risk for us as we continue this ZCBA work. And one thing that was important for us to note was that with our existing relationship with the previous government, one of the key priorities for the county was around energy. And so that made it easier for us to be able to push for zero carbon buildings through tailoring our business case around zero energy efficiency, which in turn leads to zero carbon buildings ultimately. So that did work for us for quite a while until the elections. So the thing that happens is with the new government that came in, priorities did shift a little bit, but again, the opportunity for us over there was with COP27, which happened last year, and the amount of traction that it generated, especially in the country for Kenya. And as a leader in matter sustainability as a country for the rest of the continent, it was also easy for us to be able to tailor our approach towards engaging the new government. Also, one of the things that helped us with this approach was during the stakeholder mapping process, we had to break down the county government group into now the technical side and the political side as well. So even with the shifts in priorities and the shifts in the different people that we were working with, we were still continuing with the technical background or the technical stuff within the action plan. So, and we're able to at least begin the processes of the baseline assessment. So what was affected was the commitments that were supposed to be made as part of the projects. And but luckily again, with the team that with the technical staff that we've had from the county, and them acting as liaisons between us, the Kenya Building Society, and the political leadership within the county, it did help us again tailor our business case, which is one big lesson I can see we've learned. Tailoring a business case, the business case for zero carbon buildings for all stakeholder groups, not just the county government, but also the residents of Laikipia County, from the private sector to the building occupants that will interact with these buildings. So one major thing that did help us was the continued engagement with the technical staff who are immune to the whole election process.
Thank you so much, Lee. So we have for this first step to have this dialogue in general, like understanding, like that there are so many stakeholders that have been participating, but focusing also on technical aspects, having these liaisons like with the government, continue the conversation, and also being able to participate, like as Lorena also mentioned, for the whole life cycle of the buildings, the different stakeholders, and Louis, you also mentioned like in general having the opportunity to discuss and for the business model of the building decarbonization for these action plans and how you have the support of technical staff. And thank you for your insights. So now we are moving to the next step, which is assess. So locally, it's assess the social, environmental, and economic costs and benefits of zero carbon building policies and investments to inform local government decisions. So a lot of data is needed to build a baseline of the building sector. And for this question, I would like to ask Nicolas from GBC Costa Rica, what was your biggest challenge in assessing, like accessing in general, organizing or analyzing the data, and how did you overcome this?
Thank you, Fairuz, and good morning to everybody. It's great to be here and see so many faces from different places. I think there were several steps along that process. I think part of it starts with what you mentioned earlier, the dialogue. In order to start identifying these barriers and overcoming them, the first thing we had to do is make sure that we had everyone sitting at the table. The convening of all stakeholders, especially focusing on the stakeholders that are usually overlooked or not taken into account, for us was very important. As advocates that are constantly moving these ideas forward and trying to accelerate change, there's sometimes an apprehension or a fear of having certain discussions with certain people, which we ended up, stakeholders ended up calling, let's say, blockers, people that tend to not want to help things move along as fast as we would like them to move along. So I think a very important part of assessing in order to make sure we have access to all the information that is available and we can actually analyze that and see what gaps there are that need to be overcome. We had to make sure that we were taking everyone into account. So in terms of identifying which are the people that might have very valuable things to contribute, but may not be so accessible or willing to collaborate was very important, and attack that let's say, very intentional in contacting them and getting them involved from the beginning. Once we had that, the actual assessment, what we realized is there is so much information available globally, but the most important information needs to be very regionally relevant and very contextualized. Even within Costa Rica itself, in such a small country, we have 86 municipalities, and there are huge diversities within those same municipalities, and not just in terms of climate, but also socioeconomic, even the way tariffs are set up and so on and so forth. So for us, it was very important to map out, first of all, what information is available, who's gathering what, and how that can be useful. Because people, at least in Costa Rica, tend to work very much in silos, and they tend to be very jealous of the information that they've invested in generating. This is not just the usual, let's say, zeal that there is between public and private sector, but also amongst private sector themselves, and even within different departments of the same government. They're sometimes not so willing to share information. So in that sense, I think it was very important to map these out and make sure that all of these actors had a clear idea of what our intentions are, what our motives are, and what benefits there are for them. The benefits for these different actors were very different depending on where they're from. But when we could touch on that and touch what might be close to their heart, let's say, what be specific objectives that they could see value in what we're doing, that made their collaboration much more, let's say, positive. And this is extremely important. As the project name says itself, we need to accelerate. We can't move at the same pace that we're moving. So in order to accelerate things faster than they've been moving, this was very important for us. So as Carlos Cordero mentioned in the video at the beginning, our building sector is the one most lagging in this sense in terms of technical information and the very valuable technical information that we need in order to set proper incentives and tariffs, both carrot and stick, in terms of policy, right? In general terms, in Costa Rica, at least with the 4 cities that we're working with within our city cluster, trying to promote peer-to-peer learning amongst them, there is plenty of political will in order to be aggressive with policy, but they don't know how to set it, or they can't set it because we don't have the technical information. We don't want to put the bar so high that all motivation is lost and people don't even make an attempt to try and achieve it, nor put the bar so low that that we're not really making any impact and none of our goals will be met, which are all time oriented, right? So this for us was very important. I think another factor to take into account in our assessment of what information we have and what we need was we were maybe caught a little off guard by this, but it's extremely important for us to analyze how the relation between supply and demand moving forward is varying, is changing, is constantly changing. Supply and demand in terms of energy, supply and demand in terms of materials, in terms of spaces that are available, in terms of the information needed. So this constant change in how the relation between supply and demand is behaving is something that we've had to be adapting along the way and making sure that what we're promoting and what we're trying to advocate or convince of is something that will be relevant moving forward and that we can adapt along the way in order to get that acceleration that I'm mentioning. I think yeah, in general terms, that is how the assessment has been working. We now have a very clear idea of what we need and what impact that can have, and we've been able to promote that to the corresponding actors. I think the important necessity now is having the means to gather that information. We can see what benefit that information has provided in Colombia, in Mexico, in other places. So the route is already, let's say, sketched out. We just need to be able to move along those lines and have data sets that are rich and local and that can empower our policymakers to make, let's say, the adequate adjustments to start shifting things forward.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. So it's similar what you mentioned, like moving from the dialogue and now to assess and identifying that diversity is important, but the access to information, the key stakeholders, the data that is relevant. So these are really important aspects. And considering that in Costa Rica, as you have mentioned, there are like 4 different cities participating in the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator. Thank you so much, Nicholas. And now moving to the next step that we have. For the process, so now is ACT. So policies and actions toward building decarbonization are developed and adopted. A range of policies are needed to speed the transition to a zero carbon built environment. And this question will be for you, Nikhil, from ICLEI South Asia for the work in Nagpur in India. Can you share with us how did you prioritize policies to implement first?
Sure. Thank you, Feroz. Yeah, I think I will also just provide some insights on how we went ahead with the city in terms of structuring the actions also, and then shed some light on the prioritization. So in terms of the local context, Nagpur city basically has more of an administrative and institutional structure. So that played a key role in terms of the prioritization strategy. But overall, the way we went about in terms of structuring the actions is that all the interventions, be it policy or other technical interventions, they were structured across the building life cycle in 4 phases. And this was primarily so that, actions could be targeted across each of the phase. And these 4 phases primarily included sort of the pre-construction or planning phase. The next second one was the construction phase itself. The third one was the occupancy or the operational phase, and then the end of life phase. And it was done in such a way also because so that the city could tap into opportunities for decarbonization in the pre-construction stage, for example, where there's higher potential, or specifically look at end of life, where there's still a lot of opportunities that are not tapped into. So overall, 28 interventions were identified by the city across these phases, and this included primarily 2 typologies. One was policy regulatory measures, and the other was technical actions or interventions are focused around building materials and any technical measures. And these interventions then were they were also phased over the short term, which is typically maybe a 2 to 3 year timeline, mid-term, which is around 5 to 10 years, and the longer term duration. And the broad implementation strategy, given the local context and the city's intent, was in the immediate term to also build on whatever was done. So Nagpur was done by the city already. So Nagpur has been a part of the BA initiative, and it has taken a number of actions sort of previously. So the intent was to build on that and sort of not reinvent the wheel. Also, a key strategy was that to start the implementation in public buildings, given sort of the nature and profile of the city also, so that these could serve as proof of concept in the short term, and then to transition in the midterm to sort of larger commercial and residential buildings or complexes, and eventually, say by 2050 or in the longer term, to extend the actions to cover the entire building stock. In terms of sort of the prioritization, so the prioritization for prioritization matrix was developed, where essentially 2 sort of types of factors have been considered. One is what are the benefits that each intervention or measure offers, and also factors related to implementation. So these were the two typology of factors that were considered. So for example, in benefits, some of the elements considered were the climate resilience, energy savings, resource efficiency, health and well-being, also of course emissions reduction. While in implementation factors, that was more on the practical front. So what is the political and administrative willingness? How fast can measures be implemented? So the ease of implementation, the speed of results, the scale of impact, also the feasibility around this. So these factors were essentially used to sort of prioritize and rank qualitatively primarily to rank and categorize these interventions into high priority, mid priority, and low priority measures. So just to cite some simple examples, for example, there are already policies to promote rooftop solar PV in the local context. So actions centered around this topic would rank higher in priority. Given the local context, or say an action on cool surfaces, cool roofs, thermally efficient surfaces also ranks higher. Even linkage to already ongoing initiatives was also considered. So for example, an action that has been identified to manage the air pollution that happens from the construction activity itself ranks higher, because in India and also in Nagpur city, the cities are implementing a national program on clean air. So this directly, this can be leveraged, and it's sort of easily doable in the short term. Whereas if you look at an intervention, which maybe, where you have to consider life cycle analysis and include NCA information, that would require more effort, and it would take a longer timeline. So, this in the prioritization was something that had a lower rank, and it was classified typically as a mid to long-term intervention. I think I will stop here, and just in addition, for all the interventions after they were prioritized, one more thing that was done was very clearly the stakeholders or the actors who would lead and support each intervention has also been identified for the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikhil, for sharing the experience in Nagpur, India, and all the process that has been followed. And for this same step on ACT, I would like to turn it to WRI Türkiye to Meltem. How are national policies included in your city action plans?
Hello, Feiruz, and hello, everyone. I'm very happy for this opportunity to speak about our experience with the ZCBA project in Turkey. I would like to start with a very brief information, a very brief background. In Turkey, regulatory policies are established at the national level, while the implementation is carried out by local authorities and local stakeholders. So this means that the city authorities must comply with minimum standards and policy frameworks established by the central government and the ministries. So building sector policies are, of course, no exception here. So due to the regional differences in climatic, geographic, and cultural conditions, national policies may not always effectively address local needs across the country. The dialogue between ministries and local governments is also limited, and these can create major challenges for city authorities in implementing decarbonization strategies. So in order to incorporate national policies into our city actions, we have studied the national policies that conflict with or prevent local climate action, and we try to design local solutions around it. For the past 13 years, Turkey has had a comprehensive building energy code actually, and a mandatory energy certification system in place. The code mandates that new buildings meet a minimum energy class C performance level. During the ZCBA project, a new regulation was announced requiring that all new buildings over 2,000 square meters to be built as nearly zero energy buildings. So this was quite new for the market and for all the stakeholders. And this nearly zero energy building requires a minimum energy class B performance and sourcing at least 10% of their primary energy from renewable energy sources. So the updated code do not have a whole life cycle approach, and it only focuses on operational performance. In addition to nearly zero energy building, a voluntary national green building certification system was also introduced during the ZCBA project. The country also has set a net zero emission target for 2053. So our approach was around these three main pillars. Therefore, in the short term, in the ZCBA, local efforts focused on realizing nearly zero energy buildings with green features, considering each city's unique condition, actually. For mid and longer terms, we introduce action towards decarbonization with a whole life cycle approach. In our city action plans, the local actions are introduced under 4 main categories, which are construction and demolition, building materials, new and existing buildings, and adaptation and resilience. So we wanted to cover the entire building life cycle with a touch of adaptation and resilience. The actions are offered in policymaking, finance, technology, capacity building, and awareness raising domains. And our goal is to ensure that all relevant stakeholders are involved and they are also equipped to take effective steps towards achieving decarbonization and resilience in the building sector. And our team, the ZCBA Türkiye team, has been working to build capacity of national authorities and other buildings ecosystem stakeholders during the project. So our key steps included identifying key technical staff within municipalities and providing them with accredited training, and also offering technical knowledge products to stakeholders. Another step about assisting the pilot cities, creating new organizational structures that are responsible for decarbonizing the building sector. And we encourage them to lead by example through transformation of their own building portfolio first to nearly zero energy and green building in the short run. That this will prepare them for true decarbonization in the long run. Because from having a moderate energy performance certificate class C to class C, and with an additional renewable energy integrated the buildings, it might sound very basic, but in the application, when it comes to implementation at the site, it might be very still difficult for the local stakeholders due to their lack of capacity. And additionally, we created a platform for open discussion between national governments and local governments and other stakeholders. So this was very important. So there was we created in communication channels where all parties could talk to each other easily in a neutral environment. So all these little steps allowed us to align national and local policies in the action plans. I hope this answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. From what we heard from you and Nikhil, as well, understanding the challenges in different regions around the world, how also you mentioned the Building Efficiency Accelerator, the BA, how this work has led to the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator as well. The BA has been coordinated by WRI since 2015 as part of the Sustainable Energy for All global initiative. But now identifying the involvement of the government, towards the implementation of these policies, and having this short, medium, and long term, and the prioritization, looking at the whole life cycle approach and capacity building are some keywords that I could identify from this answer. So thank you so much for sharing these insights as part of this step. And moving now to monitor. Innovative methods for monitoring progress are tested and shared at the national and local levels. For this question, I'll turn it again to you, Lorena, from Colombia. If you can share some of these insights and highlight what has been done at national and local level in Colombia. As we know, in Colombia, the work has been at national level and also for the cities of Cali and Bogota.
Thank you, Fairuz. So for this question of the monitoring process, I would like to briefly tell you about the process, then the outcome, and most important, the next steps of the recommendation of the proposal. So first of all, the monitoring proposal was based on existing information systems in the country. It was key to understand which were the national climate actions programs and policies. These at the national level and for the local level as well. At the national level, there were the Climate Action Law, the Colombia's nationally determined contribution, and the NAMA's registry. And for the cities, there was in Cali, the Construction Building Manual, and in Bogota, the other city of the project, the local action policy and the eco-urbanism policy. So this was key to understand what was the monitoring process, the monitoring system that these policies have, and also to understand what has to be additional and to understand who needs to be involved in this follow-up of the roadmap at the national and at the local level. So in terms, especially at the national level, the Climate Action Law in Colombia is one of the most important instruments for climate management in the country, and is also very aligned with our national roadmap. This Climate Action Law, it has some topics about national goals for carbon neutrality, climate resilience, measures for the achievement of the country's climate change mitigation goals as well. And it has some provisions for the promotion and development of the carbon markets and the implementation, monitoring, and the financing at the same time. So this was very aligned with our national roadmap. However, some specific elements were identified that are relevant to the national roadmap, but are not explicitly presented and identified from this Climate Action Law. These were, for example, some aspects related to the renovation of buildings, the labeling and certification of buildings, the strategic lines related to the formalization of the construction sector. Here we have in this global baseline assessment identified that the informal sector was very important in terms of the emissions for the country. So this was not identified from this tool. The outcome that we had a monitoring system that is structured in 3 categories. The first of them accounts for the results and the impact on climate change, mitigation and adaptation. We identified for these 5 indicators. 3 of them are from the Climate Action Act. So this is very important because we don't have to ask for more indicators or more data to be collected. The second monitoring category is for the implementation and output indicators for each of the 6 categories of the roadmap. In this one, we had more indicators. There are 20 of the selected one were 20, and 11 of them, they come from the existing information systems in the country. So this is from the statistics center of the country and so on. So the information, some of them can be already collected. And the third one, it was for the second level actions that were proposed in the roadmap. These are a lot more. There are 163 actions. So there was proposed a list of tools to collect this information, but this is like a bigger approach. So in terms of the recommendation, it was recommended to the government that the monitor of the greenhouse gases mitigation indicators should be every 2 years. This was aligned with the report that should be submitted by the country to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that starting in 2024. So there was aligned with these 2 years recommendation. What else? It was recommended that there should be a pilot project of the monitoring the methodology, to give feedback to these proposals, to have a base year compilation of data indicators. This is proposed to be the next year, 2024, to have all the information aligned. And as Nicolas said, it's very important to understand how the data is being collected, how it's going to be processed, to understand the development of new information capture instruments, how it's going to be at the national and how it's going to be at the local level, and how these two levels are going to interact. And finally, the capacity building and strengthening, because at the government level should be a capacity to understand this information, to process them, and to give feedback to the policies that are in process or to be developed.
Thank you so much, Lorena, for sharing this information. And yes, if we can have access to certain the monitor process that can be shared with the audience, that would be great. If we can share it in the chat or with Natalie, I think here. And now, like moving towards the next step that we have, step number 5 is invest. A business model for investing in zero carbon buildings is developed with multilateral development banks and the private sector. So this question will be to Tuğçe. If you can tell me about the bankable pilot project you worked with local leaders in the public and private sectors on, and what is the opportunity and what's holding it back from being built from the experience in Turkey? Please, Tuğçe.
Thank you, Fairuz. Thank you. Hi, everyone. As part of the ZCBA project, we set a goal of aligning the building efficiency and portfolios of municipalities and their future building projects with the nearly zero energy building regulations and the national green certificate system for buildings and settlements. In short, it's called as the SDR. In this context, we first evaluated the existing building stock and planned future projects in Konya, one of our pilot project cities, in collaboration with the Konya Metropolitan Municipality. We developed a renovation portfolio for the current buildings. Additionally, we decided to consider the municipality's new central library project, which is planned to start during the ZCBA project as a pilot project. And the building complex has a floor area of 1,200 square meters and has various functions, including quiet rooms, study rooms, cafe, and restaurants. To obtain the STR for the library project, we identified responsible technical personnel with the municipality. These individuals attended the STR expert training and became certified consultants, taking on the responsibility of executing the project. Moreover, the municipality began to receive consultancy services from a green consultancy firm, and certified experts gained the opportunity to acquire experience in implementing the project. We conducted discussions with national and international finance institutions for project financing and created a financing option based on public-private sector cooperation through the Green Economy Financing Facility Program developed by the EBRD. Through JEFs, the EBRD provides credit lines to local financial institutions so that they can finance the green investments of a large number of eligible beneficiaries. The project will be realized by private sector contractors. So the Green Technology Selector tool by JEF was introduced to private contractors to identify a list of eligible high-performing technologies and materials to be used in the building. The planning phase of the project will be over soon, and the library project will be built as Turkey's first nearly zero energy and nationally certified green public building. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tuğçe. And also for this question, I would like to hear from the experience from India. Nikhil, can you share with us more about the pilot projects in Nagpur?
Sure. Yeah, I think also in response to that opportunity and what's really holding back. So in terms of Nagpur, like I highlighted, that there is a large base of institutional and public buildings in the city, and the city's leadership was keen to intervene and implement actions in public buildings in particular to begin with, because this can then help sort of act as proof of concept and demonstrate also what are the benefits and impacts. And this also addresses a key challenge in having a pipeline of bankable projects, if you want to call it as such, because this would help you provide some evidence base, because the city is keen to fund either renovation and deep decarbonization of existing buildings and also new buildings. But the challenge is that there's limited information to really package this into bankable projects, and that is where the city was keen to take actions. So in sort of with this context, so then two pilot activities were implemented in the city. The first piece was to review and provide technical inputs for two public buildings that currently are at the design stage. So these buildings include one police station and one multi-skill training and development center. So the city wanted the designs and the sort of the tender documents to be reviewed and to identify recommendations to decarbonize these buildings, and the recommendations then could be taken up. And the larger intent of this first activity was to link to a more strategic activity, which is the second one, where the city wanted to again develop something like a model RFP, so where you identify for future public buildings what are the specific provisions and conditions that can be added into this one document, which becomes a template and a tool, which can help integrate deep decarbonization measures into all future public buildings that come up. And the intent was that this sort of becomes a ready practical tool, a ready reckoner for the city to use, because like most of the cities, really the public officials do not have the bandwidth or time to refer to different standards and guidelines and identify what should be taken from all these standards and regulations that are there. So these sort of are the two pilot activities that were taken up in Nagpur. And also the intent of the city was sort of to focus on something that is in control of the city, and also through this process, what was also highlighted in a number of stakeholder discussions and consultations was the need to engage and disseminate information to sort of the smaller developers who actually in practical terms are involved in construction of a large chunk of the building stock, and really the information should reach to them to have the transformation at scale on the ground. Yeah, I hope this answers the question. This is it from us.
Thank you so much, Nikhil, and also Tukshe for sharing these insights for this last step. And also, finishing these 5 steps for the whole process of roadmaps and city action plans, I would like to have some time at this moment and for questions. So we are receiving some questions also in the Q&A. Before that, and just having some opportunity for all of our panelists and to comment on all of the other stages that have been presented as well. Basically, and I will also like to hear what do you think also the cities would want to do next, and the perspective from the city. And I would like to start also with Louis, also from Laikipia County, and just to see, I don't know if you have something from the government that you would like to share, Louis, with all of us, and then I will move to the other panelists that you can add some comments from what has been shared of the challenges that have been faced throughout this process, and we can have some time when we are receiving some of the questions. So this for you, Louis, if you would like to share that from the perspective also of the government.
Thank you, Fairuz. If I got it correctly about the future plans for Laikipia County, discussions around the whole drafting process of the action plan has been one of the key things that we'll be looking into is identifying some of the pilot projects we can do. And one of the key points that hit home for the county was playing leadership by example. So again, coming from the national level, from the previous government, one of the main agendas that was being pushed was affordable housing. And now trickling down to the county level, a couple of projects were identified as opportunities, affordable housing projects that are going to kickstart sometime this year in Laikipia County. So discussions around that has been to model affordable housing for using some of the tools that we have locally to sort of create a model for what a base case zero carbon affordable housing project would look like in the county. Aside from that, also looking at how the government can play a role in trickling also the incentives that are provided from the national level to the county level, and creating that enabling environment through the private sector as well. So again, on the first point, by them, it's a strong belief from their end that by them implementing the affordable housing project and a couple of other projects that we're discussing in the pipeline, they believe that would strongly catalyze now action from the private sector as well, and to be able to sort of use their project as a template and replicate the same in their development projects at the county level. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much, Louis. And it's important to understand, what we have heard for the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator project is the different sectors that have been involved and type of buildings, right? Like these, like affordable housing projects and pilots, how identifying this for the case of Laikipia County, and also looking at public buildings in Nagpur and understanding different sectors that have been participating. And Louis, I know we have a message also that has been shared by the representative from Laikipia County. We'll be sure to include that in the video, the recording afterwards, but in case we can share just a bit of that if time allows. Just some seconds, but we understand that they have been also participating with you, Louis, in this process, the communication that you have had from the changes in the government. So that's great to hear, Louis, about these chances and opportunities for the county. So we'll be sure to include the message in the recording as well. And for the next question, and I know we would like to hear, and it would be good to learn if there are some comments on the other stages that have been shared from the different regions. And I will turn this to you, Nicolas, from Costa Rica, if you would like to share a comment on the other stages that you would like, please go ahead.
Thank you, Fairuz. Yes, definitely. I think I'd like to share just a general comment of the result of all the stages together, because we've been very happy with the process moving from BEA to the transition to ZCBA, and these 4 cities have come along with that with that process. And I think something very valuable is that it's been made very clear to all of the actors involved, both at national and local levels, the huge opportunity that there is through these kinds of initiatives. Stakeholders that have in the past been very hard to access, let's say, are now on board in a certain sense. When we present them with hard data, data that we all know, things like when I talk to them about how by 2050, we will need 75% more of the infrastructure that we have today. We only have 25 of what we need by 2050. And in terms of buildings, what we have today is only 50% of the buildings we will need by 2060 at global levels. When we talk about this and we tell them facts like or results of studies such as a footprint comparable to Paris is being built every week, things like this, this brings the attention and the interest of many people. And sometimes these actors tend to be very, let's say, intimidated by this information. They find it overwhelming, and how are we going to do these things? But I think that this project allows the implementation and allows them to be more empowered and informed in a way that we're working this as opportunities. The building sector as a whole, there are actors within the building sector can see this as an opportunity, a huge opportunity for us to be a positive impact and move the needle in the direction that we need to see that needle moved in terms of climate change, in terms of impact that their policies can have. And this tends to make the dialogues much more easier when we're trying to bring together private and public sectors that sometimes don't want to play well together, and now they're more willing to do so. So I think the way these steps are structured and that we involve all of these stakeholders does bring this as a, let's say, a general result, especially when we're talking about developing countries. When we use the example of one Paris every week or one New York every whatever, but we know that the buildings that are going to be built are not going to be like Paris or New York. Most of that development is going to be in developing countries. So when we think about that large footprint being built every week, knowing that it's not going to be like most buildings in Paris, these are going to be in developing countries. They're not at that level of code and policy, makes it much more urgent. And I think in our case, in developing countries, empowers these actors to say, hey, we can be a part of this positive change, of this transformation, and we can, let's say, accelerate our process to make sure that we're contributing in that way. So that's just something I want to bring in general as a result of the way that the project is structured and taking into account, obviously, the importance of the acceleration. Thank you, Fairuz.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. And like having an overview of this, the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator project implementation, as my colleague Sumida mentioned in the introduction, like we have started this project since 2021 and now 2023, closing this project. So a lot of challenges we have been experiencing throughout this time, besides the pandemic, and also maybe like recently there was a large earthquake in Turkey, and we're glad to see the video from the representative from Gaziantep, where the epicenter took place, but also understand these challenges and that have been faced around the world in this global project. I would like to hear from Turkey, like how should Turkey align zero carbon building codes with seismic resilience measures to best address earthquake reconstruction and decarbonization needs? And I will turn it to Meltem, please.
Thank you for the question, Fairuz. As many of you might know, Turkey was hit by two powerful earthquakes with a magnitude of 7.6 and 7.8 in the same day, almost 2.5 months ago. Over 50,000 people lost their lives across 11 cities, and around 13,000 buildings collapsed, and around 300,000 buildings are heavily damaged now and need to be demolished and rebuilt. Turkey is in a high seismic zone, so new earthquakes are very likely to occur in the future. Actually, Turkey has seismic regulations for buildings since 2007, and this regulation is updated in 2018. However, the buildings constructed prior to adoption of the code still make up of the majority of the building stock. So this is the problem. So there is a certain need for urban renewal campaigns across the country, where the government should provide incentives and financial programs for building owners and developers to adopt earthquake resistance and low carbon building practices at the same time. Pilot buildings should be built in every city to set an example for the buildings which are structurally still fine and don't need to be taken down. Structural reinforcement and deep energy renovations should be offered as a package together. Additionally, of course, training and education programs should be offered to raise awareness among stakeholders involved in the construction and reconstruction of the building process. And more importantly, the site inspections, which there is a site inspection scheme in Turkey in place, which usually focuses on the structural performance of the building, but its scope should be enhanced to cover like the zero carbon building practices as well, because like we have everything in like as regulations, but the problem is usually in the implementing. So like more strict inspection schemes are necessary, and then they should cover like structural safety of buildings as well as the green building practices. So by aligning zero carbon building codes with specific resilience measures, Turkey can effectively address its decarbonization and earthquake reconstruction needs while ensuring the safety and well-being of its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meltem. Well, it gives us an overview on how, and we have been always offering our support, our thoughts also with the people from Turkey in general, and thank you for sharing this, and we hope that the efforts of the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator, as you mentioned, Meltem, could align like to achieve these opportunities for the whole country and to move towards a more resilient sector. So thank you so much, Meltem, for sharing this. And now we know and also an important part of this work is around gender and equity considerations. And we have heard also from the experience in Colombia, including like these informal settlements as part of the roadmap had been like they have been included. And we know the challenge like in general of this work, like how has that been included? So I would like to ask you, and this question will be to Nikhil, how have you integrated like gender and or equity considerations in your roadmaps or action plans?
Sure. Yeah, I think in terms of including sections of the society, especially like you mentioned, informal settlements, so that has been considered, and that is also that was also the intent to really not leave anybody out, and especially in interventions where you're focusing on cool roof and such materials, thermally efficient materials, which can help provide benefits around thermal comfort, especially in such type of structures. So that has been considered within the measures and the strategies. In terms of including or addressing gender as well. So specifically during the consultations by stakeholders, for example, it was highlighted in Nagpur that there's a need to address the facilities and amenities at the construction sites, especially for women workers and even for children, for example. So provision of such basic amenities is maybe at times there are gaps in this. So this has been addressed in the strategy specifically, where the facilities and well-being and inclusion of construction workers and gender has been considered specifically for Nagpur. Also, in terms of skilling and capacity building, also, so the city was keen to include and assign roles specifically, both skilled and unskilled roles, to women in the building construction industry, and to ensure that there's a pool of skilled workforce, including including all genders, so that they can play a key role in furthering implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. And I know some questions, and I would like to see how can we address this in the few minutes that we have, and allow everyone, like of the panelists, to share some final comments around this. But just to mention, and if you would like to add around gender equity, also considering what would be like the next steps for cities and countries now that we are closing this project and this phase of the Zero Carbon Accelerator, or what would you like to learn in the coming steps of the process, like some ideas that I'm giving you for this closing remarks, since we'll have 1 minute per panelist to share. So I'm giving some ideas, like and what would you need, like from international organizations like WRI to accelerate for this work. So I will start with you, Elena, and just if you can briefly mention final comments, please.
Perfect. So I'm going to take into the next steps idea. We in Colombia, we decided from these 160 transformative actions which are going to be developed for this government. We had a change of government the last year in August. So there was important to understand with this vision of the long-term goals, what has to be done in the next 4 years to accomplish the goals for 2030. This in order to understand what are the actions for each sector. So we give some recommendations for the industrial sector, for example, where it was to measure the emissions and impact of all the links in the production processes in order to compare with the companies and industries. For the design and developers to adopt an integrated process, an integrative process from the early stages of the project. For low carbon operation to adopt energy efficiency measures. For financing sector to increase the incentive and subsidy initiatives from the academia to strengthen the content of university courses, and to the public sector at the national level and local level to incorporate the transformative actions into policy instruments. So that's the message, to be very clear of what has to be done to accomplish the short-term goals. Thank you, Fairuz.
Thank you so much, Lorena. And now I turn to you, Nicolas. One final comment, please.
Thank you, Fairuz. Yes, I think there's plenty to do with the cities, both with the ones that have already started, but also I think a very important aspect of this project has always been, how do we do things, or how do we set things up in a way that facilitates and promotes replication and escalation? Obviously, we were working with a city cluster of 4 cities, and as I mentioned, there are many municipalities in Costa Rica, and the idea is not to go through the same process 82 more times. The idea is to do this in a way that we can coordinate with the national government. They can now see the results, what worked, what didn't work, and we can work much more closely with the national government through their agencies to try and get this moving forward at a much more broader scale, not 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 cities at a time, but working with all of them. Obviously, this requires much more resources. The idea is that with technical assistance, we can get those baselines set up that we were mentioning, have that local data and those monitoring systems set up so that they can incorporate more and more data from the different cities that come on board. So I think in terms of next steps, in our case, where we have national commitments, NDCs, national decarbonization plan stuff, where we have a top-down situation in terms of policy, now that we've demonstrated locally how we can meet that and implement that at a local level, the idea is to replicate and escalate that. So I think there are 2 things going on. One, with the cities we have, keep moving them forward and keep them opening the path in a pioneering kind of frontier aspect to pave the way. And other is get a much more broader, let's say, escalation and replication, so we can move really at the pace that we need to move to reach the goals that we've set.
Thank you, Nicolas. And now, Melton, please.
Within these 2 years, so we were able to create a national roadmap that includes very interesting high-level strategies and 2 city action plans, which tells about like what is missing and what needs to be done. For the next step, the cities and the ministries will still need like the implementation support and the resources to realize these strategies that we have set. There is still a lot of things to do. So where we are living is like what needs to be done. And like in order to do all of these, the countries, the cities will still require like financing because like the decarbonization is necessary for every sector in the country, not only building sector. Therefore, there's a lot of competition. So each sector has its own roadmap or own agenda with a lot of plans, projects to be realized, but the finances is limited. So the cities and the countries will still require a financing, a climate finance, accessing the climate finance, as well as like technical sources to realize this. For instance, in Turkey, like one of the high-level strategies is to develop a new tool that takes into account the whole life cycle building emissions. So there is an existing tool for the operational energy consumption and emissions, but this needs to be enhanced. For instance, this could be a nice project as a future step. So there are several other ideas in the roadmap and the action plans. So we still have to keep our relations with the cities and the ministries and continue supporting them. Thank you.
Thank you, Meltem. I know we're running out of time, but I would like to ask Louis and Nikhil to share some final words. First, Louis, then Nikhil, please.
Okay, thank you, Fairuz. So in closing, also my remarks being quite similar to what Nicholas was saying. With the work that we've done with counties so far, and some of the challenges arising from the work that we've done, one of the things that will come clear is for us to be able to formalize the collection and the development of these monitoring systems that we'll use to create a confident baseline for the county. And not just for the county, also in a way for us to replicate to the other counties and also at a national level, hopefully. The good thing for us, or the opportunity for us as Kenya nationally, is that the legal and regulatory framework is rather progressive, and we've done what we need to do from that perspective. What lies ahead is for us to be able to implement and show that what we've put on paper is actually possible on ground, and for us to be able to ensure that more and more people understand how zero carbon buildings benefit them, not just from a theoretical perspective, but also now seeing it from being put on the ground like this. So in closing, we'd be happy to receive any technical assistance, any also financial assistance on the projects and initiatives that the county is looking to implement. And also very happy to collaborate with everyone else in the future iterations of this program.
Thank you, Louis. Nikhil, please.
Yeah, in the context of Nagpur, I think the foundation now is there through this plan, through the measures, through all the information that has been collected. But I think the main priority that the city is looking for is now for support on action on ground, actually, where you're implementing pilot projects and demonstrations, where you're showing and showcasing and also testing how different technology, materials and solutions, how they can be implemented. So the city is really keen and looking forward for such support. And also where this can be addressed across different phases, for example, if you're talking about how do you go about deconstructing buildings, gradually, so that you can improve their circularity at the end of life, for example. So the city is really keen to, for support for action on ground, really. And also another key element is in terms of capacity building, where the city officials and the departments really, where they really undergo focused capacity building and training so that they are able to sort of devise policies and really effect this implementation and transition to zero carbon buildings in practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. So I go back to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Fairuz. Thank you to all of the panelists for these fantastic insights. I turn it to Michael Dest for the closing of the webinar.
Great, thank you, Natalie, and thank you to everyone for joining this webinar, and again to our speakers for sharing your experiences and insight. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I want to quickly recap what you learned, and then I'll leave with a closing remark. So we learned about the need to map and include stakeholders at every single step along the value chain of the building sector whilst you're planning for building decarbonization. We learned about the need to put vertical integration into practice and to facilitate collaboration between national and local government, really to advance these ambitions we've got. We also learned about the importance of adopting a systems approach, the importance of public sector leadership in showing an example, and the importance of pre-construction and end-of-life stages to address carbon emissions as well. And we were reminded of the need to build staff and institutional capacity to deliver on these zero carbon building action plans. Well, that's it for today, and soon for the ZCBA itself. WRI's Built Environment Programme is currently designing a new program that will build on and continue the work of the ZCBA. We haven't quite finalized the details, so please keep an eye out for that. We'll share this with you as soon as we can. And with that, thank you again for joining. Hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you soon again. Thank you very much.